Okay, so I have always been a bit skeptical about Angular model inputs and two-way data binding in general, because the idea of inputs in my mind has always been a unidirectional data flow. But until I came across this issue, so I just wanted a simple side nav opening and closing using this button here. I was getting a little issue with it, and I was surprised how elegantly the Angular model inputs resolved it for me. Also, it allowed me to refactor my code in a very easier way than I would have done without it. Okay, so the issue was that if you look at this theme builder app here, which I recently completed, you can see that when I click on this button, the opening and closing of the side nav works really nice. But when I click on the backdrop here, you can see the side nav closes. And when I click on open, nothing happens. And when I click on open again, the side nav opens again. So any idea how did this happen and what the issue might be? So now would be a good time to pause the video and think about it yourself and try to figure out what could be wrong, because I'm just going to tell you in a bit. Okay, so it's a weird issue, admittedly, and it only happens when I click on the backdrop, close it using the backdrop. So how can we diagnose this? Now, so now let's go ahead and diagnose this first. So, but first, let me give you a bit of a code walkthrough so that you can know exactly how it's set up. So we have an app component here, which has the toolbar at the top. This has the button, and then we have the side nav container. If you have used Angular material, you would know that we have a side nav component inside of it. And this is actually the side nav that we're talking about. Then we are passing in the opened input parameter to it, which we are controlling through a signal which we have set up in this component itself. So that's called component selector open. Let me show you the signal here. So you can see the component selector open is set to true initially, and then we can change it by using the button here. So in the mat toolbar, you can see we can toggle between the states of this signal. So, but then why is the issue coming up? So let me just use the new effect API to find out what the state is of my component selector open signal so that we can actually see what is happening. So if you're going to do an effect here, log component selector open, this is going to be an effect. And let's just console.log the state of this component selector open. And this is one of the nicest things about this signals API, this effect, because it allows you to track the state of the signal at all times whenever it changes. And we don't have to put in, console.logs at various places in event handlers where things are changing. Okay, so let's go back to this and now see what happens. So when we click on this, you can see the state changes to false. When we click on this again, you can see the state changes to true, it opens up. And when we click on this again, you can see the state changes to false. So true, false, this works fine. Now when we make it open and then we click on the backdrop, you can see that nothing happens. And then when we click on it again, you can see it returns to false. Now false means it will be closed, so it remains closed. And then when we click on it again, it returns to true, so it basically comes to the true state again, so it worked fine. And now when we click on it, it will work fine again until we use the backdrop again, which doesn't do anything. So what is happening here essentially is that when we click on the side nav, it changes the side nav state, but it does not update the signal to that state. And that is a problem of synchronization between the side nav component and our parent signal or the parent component. Okay, so what options do we have to resolve this? Now, we can listen to an event inside of the side nav component. So when it closes, we can update our parent signal. So this is one way to do it. Let's go and try this out. So we are going to go in my mat side nav container, and the mat side nav, you can see we have it here. And let's add event handler here. You can see we have a closed event handler here. So let's add .set false. So when the side nav closes, we are going to revert the value of the component selector open signal as well. And let's try this out and see whether it works. And now when we click on the backdrop and we click on open again, you can see it returns to false. It turns to true again. When we click on the backdrop again, we can see that it turns to false. So the value of the signal remains synchronized. But again, it's not ideal because we need to have more event handlers for cases. Maybe there were other cases as well, and we would have to add event handlers for those cases as well. So it's not really that ideal in terms of the amount of code. And since I have another side nav here, I'll have to add another handler here. There is another more elegant way, and that is by using Angular model inputs. So a model input is basically a signals equivalent of the two-way data binding that we have already seen in a lot of places in Angular. One of the examples is the ng model directive, the most common example, which we use to bind the value of a template-driven form or a template-driven form field with a single property. So earlier, before Angular version 17.3, this only worked with the two-way data binding, only worked with properties. But now, if you look at the code here, for example, these square braces are basically, they mean that we are sending a single input. It's a one-way input. All right. But when we round braces inside of it, this now becomes the familiar banana in the box syntax. And this means that it is going to be now two-way data binding. Now, this worked with only properties before. But as you know, properties are not reactive and we can't listen to property changes. So if you remember in ng model, we also had to add an ng model change because we couldn't listen to those events. So, but with signals in Angular version 17.3, the Angular team added a model signal, which is a signals equivalent of two-way data binding. So now we can just remove these value accessors here and we can just assign a signal to this two-way data binding as well. And now we can remove this event handler here and let's try and test it out again. Let's try clicking on the backdrop here. It becomes false, becomes true, it becomes false, it becomes true, it becomes false. This also works, and this also works. So the value of the signal now is synchronized between the child component and the parent component in a very elegant way here. All right. Now we also want to do it for the other side nav. So what we will need to do, we have another signal to deal with that. And we can just add the banana in the box syntax here as well. And we can make this just a signal. All right. Now, keeping this as a signal means that we can actually use computers, we can actually use effects, we can make this value reactive, and we can use this in other places as well. Great. So this is nice and fine. And this was sort of a turning point for me for model inputs because I have always discounted model inputs and never used them much in my own apps. But this is really useful when you have a parent and a child component relationship and you want to keep the data synchronized between them both in a very elegant and clean way without needing any additional code. So you can see how this fixed our bug, but it's not the only use of model signals. So we can use it to refactor our large components as well. So here, for example, I have some code here. I have a button and then I have a title, which also changes. I've made it a signal because it actually changes based on the responsive bits on the screen size. And we also have the right side button, which is to open the theme. So I would like all of this functionality to be encapsulated in a separate toolbar component. So let's try and create a new component here. Let's create a new component here and ggc. Let's add it to our components folder and let's name it toolbar. This will be our app toolbar, which will be our own toolbar. So the component is created. Let's go to this component and toolbar. And let's copy this button and everything in between to this component here. Okay, we need to add some imports, obviously. We need to add a matte button module. We need to add matte icon. Okay, then we also need to add this title. So let's shift this title here. It's nice to have the functionality that is only needed in that component and others can be. And then we need the responsive service here as well. So let's put the responsive service here as well. Let's inject this, add all missing imports. Okay, so this is fine. Now all that we are left with now is these two signals that we want to obviously toggle. Now what do we do about this? Now in a traditional way, if we are not using model inputs, we would actually have to use an event handler here, an output event handler here, or an output basically. And then we are just going to emit that output here in the click event. And then we are going to listen to this output here when we utilize this toolbar and we are going to change the signal. But that's a very long drawn way of doing that when we easily have an option of using model signals to synchronize state. All right, so let's import this here. Let's do app toolbar and we import this here. And then we can use model signals to actually synchronize the value between parent and child again. So let's define these as model signals in our child component here. So let's write component selector open. Now the syntax is really simple. We do model. Okay, now this is an input, but this is a two-way input. So you can actually change the value from inside the component as well. And we are also going to make it required because we are going to assume that the toolbar needs to send these signals so that it remains synchronized with the outside world. Otherwise, there's no use for the toolbar to have these signals. All right. And the value of these would be Boolean. So we are just going to give Boolean here and we don't need to give an initial value. All right. Similarly, we would also do it for the theme selector one because there are two buttons which are changing the state. So we are going to do it with theme selector open, the same thing. And now the errors are resolved here. And we just need to pass on these theme selector, these signals from outside of the component. So let's make the banana in the box syntax. So let's do this component selector open. This will be our component selector open signal here. And then another banana in the box syntax for theme selector open. And this will be our theme selector open signal in this parent component. All right, let's save this and let's try this out. Okay, you can see the layout is a bit off. So let's fix that as well. So we need some styles as well. You can see that we had some styles here in the mat toolbar. We're just going to remove this and we're just going to shift these styles inside of our toolbar, because we are encapsulating all of the functionality and the appearance of the toolbar inside of this. So we are going to target it to the host because we don't have any parent component here, any parent element here. And justify content, we would also need to make this display flex and the width as 100%. And we're also going to align it in the center so that it looks good. Okay, let's check this out now and see if the layout looks fine. And you can see the layout looks really nice. And now let's test out the real functionality. We want to see whether the button causes the signal to change. So when we click on this, you can see the signal changes as before. Everything works as before when you click on this. So the state of the signal or the state of the side nav is neatly shared between the subcomponents without us needing any additional, functionality, any outputs or anything like that. Great. And now when we look back at the code here, we can see that our code is now cleaner than before because the toolbar functionality is encapsulated inside of this subcomponent. Great. So if you're finding value in this video, I would invite you to like and subscribe to my channel so that it can reach more people and benefit them as well. And if you'd like, you can also buy me a coffee at my BMC page, the link of which is given here. Back to the video. Okay, so but what if there were no model inputs? Now, if there wasn't a model inputs, we would have to use another pattern to resolve this, and I would have used that pattern to synchronize data between these child components and the parent component, and that is a pattern of a service. So I would have created a sidebar service here, and I would have added these two signals to that service, and then I would have updated and got value from that service so that the state of the side nav we always get from that service itself. All right. But again, it wouldn't have been as elegant and clean as this one. So it would be a second best solution to this issue here. So in short, in summary, model inputs help us synchronize the data between the parent and the child in a very elegant way without needing any additional event handlers. And it also helps us refactor large components. For example, consider large form components. You can actually split them up into subcomponents and maintain the state of the form value within the parent component as well. So it's really helpful in refactoring large components into subcomponents. So I hope you liked this video, and again, like and subscribe if you found this useful so that it can reach more people. And I'm going to see you next time with something more interesting. Thanks for watching.